University of Johannesburg has a really good vision and mission, and I think it resonates with many universities globally, that we want to mobilize and transform through knowledge generation, but really be part of our communities, and that we start co-creating these solutions. But if we look at what is happening in the classrooms, we are often find that we are busy with the content and the theory that is needed to build these professions, that we often don't get enough time to reframe these problems and to spend time focusing our youth on these societal issues that we are faced with. So when we look at sustainable development, unemployment, and how do we invest from the ground up, I'm not going to make any claims of alleviating unemployment, but I do think it is themes that we need to bring into the curriculum, even if we don't sit on the social science side of the fence, and if we're in engineering and technology, and that we reframe the problem, look at how our perspectives are changing locally but also globally, and that we see how do we sort of respond to that approach. This is sort of an image that we often see, and this is the dark continent of Africa, and how energy security, which is often in the news these days, have left our continent switched off. And if we look at history, it is only through access to steady supply of energy do we see that we have economies that are growing in the past. Looking at some data of 2015, we still have about 2.8 billion people who don't have access to a steady supply of power or energy, and 1.1 billion of those people don't have access to energy at all. Even though we will be reaching about 1 billion people by 2040 with access to a steady supply of energy, it will still not be in the areas in sub-Saharan Africa and in the rural areas that is still part of South Africa. According to the same report by the UN, about half of the people who don't have access to energy lives in sub-Saharan Africa. So on our continent, in our region, where we should be leading in this environment. What is really disturbing is that the technology already exists. If we look at the renewable energy available to us, we have more sunlight than most of the environments around us. Germany is a great example. They've got about 60% of the energy supply is from solar PV, and they have half the amount of solar energy available to them to solve this problem. And it was because of this sort of, we often use these facts to frame our research, to apply for quite a large sum of research funding to different institutions to say we need to do more research on the technology to solve these problems. But in the last 5 years, we've seen that solar PV, for instance, had made such strides that we could actually have solar-powered vehicles driving around on the continent, and in fact we do. So this is a car that we built. It was one of the first projects I did at UJ to create authentic environments for the students to participate in. And I always had to defend the fact that we were spending so much money on this project when we are going through communities, driving with a solar-powered vehicle, literally doing thousands of kilometers across the continent, visiting communities where they were very excited to receive us. But often I felt that it was just a brief moment in their lives, and we left nothing behind. This sort of started changing our focus a little. We still built solar cars, so we built 3 solar cars, a couple of other vehicles, because the students really like doing it. And the projects teach us how to engage with people outside of our own environments. I knew nothing about building solar cars when we started. I didn't have any real ambitions of camping across the road sort of everywhere we go. But it was a very valuable project for us. And it took us out of the classroom, it took us out of our labs, and it took us into communities. And it exposed us to the things that we often see, facts and numbers, that 2.8 billion is an impressive number, but if you don't see the faces behind that, it doesn't really impact you in the same way if you read it in a textbook. And that has led us to look at ways of changing not just the perspective of our students, but the way that we are teaching currently. Now, a good friend of mine on Friday said that changing the curriculum is like relocating a graveyard. You shouldn't do that. And I think she's right. We don't need to change the curriculum in drastic ways to create environments where we can collaborate and expose our students to content beyond that what we are teaching in the class. You cannot get away from engineering without the third law of thermodynamics. You have to have those things in place. And the curriculum is already full. So how do you bring about this change in perspective where we can go from the prescribed, as the engineering council prescribes it, that we go beyond knowing and being aware of the impact of engineering, but that we start designing with impact in mind, that engineers try to influence the world in their environment. Through the work that we've done, we've connected with quite a few networks. We collaborate across different faculties, and it has exposed us to different methodologies. So if you grew up in the science fraternity or in the engineering fraternity specifically, there's only one method, and that is the scientific method. So when you try and solve problems that don't have a scientific or technology solution, it has a human solution, and it sort of speaks to what we were listening this morning. How do you get students to interact and engage? And the only efficient way for us to do that without having to relocate those graves is through collaboration across disciplines and across faculties. The first time I used the word wicked problems in a paper, I got it from a very sort of renowned journal in engineering. I got reprimanded by the reviewer telling me not to use slang in my paper. Wicked problems is actually a term that was coined in the 70s, maybe a little bit ahead of its time, talking about interconnected, difficult to solve problems, where we often find engineers spending a lot of time trying to solve elements of these problems. So if we think about the problem around energy and energy security, it's more than just a technology solution that we require. It's more than just more efficient PV cells. It's the adoption, the policies, the politics around energy that makes these solutions not viable and not implemented at the time that we are living in. We have to reframe the way that we as engineers and scientists look at problems in terms of these wicked problems. The amounts that are invested in science and technology are far greater and exceeds that we spend in arts and culture. And if we don't get a social return on that investment, it will have all been for naught. These problems are exasperated if we look at how the planet is really suffering, and we are all looking for a place on that rocket ship to go to Mars. If we reach 9 billion, this is a closed system. We will not be able to support it. We are seeing, there's still some climate change deniers out there. Every now and again we take a couple of steps back depending on who's in power in America. And we still haven't come up with the solutions. We've only just become aware of the problems. So how do we reframe the way that we teach, the way that we implement these solutions in the curriculum? First of all, it's about understanding the interconnections between these problems. That you cannot solve for energy and not solve for water. You cannot solve for food resilience and have, in a drought-stricken country where the water that we are using for agriculture, where you have a community that has no water for weeks, living right across green sugar canes in Natal. So how do we solve these problems without expecting more and more of engineers? And it is through collaboration. So we're grappling with all these things, and sort of we drive up into Namibia and Botswana and areas in sub-Saharan Africa. We faced more and more with communities that are really struggling. And we realized that before we can start solving the energy question, we really have to go back to water and food and the basic human needs. The University of Johannesburg, as you heard today, one of the biggest universities in Gauteng, has 50,000 young people. They are energetic. It's a generation who feels that they want to make an impact, they want to do real things, and they don't want to sit in class listening to us being very academic about the theory. They want to apply it. On the other hand, we also have that our industry and business partners are asking more and more for universities to deliver students that have strong leadership, that take ownership, that work well in teams. And you can't teach these skills by writing an exam. We need to relook at how we are going to formalize that curriculum. And one of the solutions that we found is by looking at the connected themes in the research that we were doing. So we started with e-mobility, and then we realized, well, there's this whole nexus between energy and the environment and food and water and waste management, and the role that engineers actually play in that. So even though we often tend to focus just on the technology and we sort of zoom down on that specific area where I am an expert, and I don't like going beyond that. I don't like sitting with the humanities guys arguing about the ethics of my technology because it's so great. and creating on environments where we can do this more. And this is in no terms sort of, it was just a sort of a review of the things that we were doing in the faculty in any case. So we already had a lot of these themes, but for one, it was happening in isolation in the engineering faculty, and we didn't hear a lot about it. So if you just take sort of the clean energy technologies and you look at the agriculture sector, you'll find that renewable energy, with solutions that are old and known, can actually play a big role in this space. And in the rest of the continent, we find that in environments like Kenya and Tanzania, we have all these new developments of innovation in especially small-scale farming. And in South Africa, it hasn't caught on yet. And we find that people, the way that we view farming and land and all the political issues around that is not one of an option where we could make money. We looked at some of the projects that we had. So this is just a sort of an impact when you combine solar power with a drip irrigation system, and you take it into a community where previously they had a diesel pump that they were pumping water, paying for the diesel with grant funding because there was no income in the Kwakwane village. So it's a great project, and the students who participated on that is probably better off because they worked in a community engaged learning environment. But if the university pulls out that support, what will happen with the infrastructure, and is that a sustainable community? So a project that started off with just replacing a solar pump with a diesel pump with a solar power pump eventually ended up being a PV power station, a creche, and we needed a whole energy system. And now we've got weather monitoring and the telemetry so that we know when the pump is down. But we've went from almost zero farming to having little farm gardens around the homes, and now they'll be looking at sort of chili production and everything else, but it's still not completely sustainable. Connected to that, you look at sort of the energy mix, and you add biogas, and you can create power from waste, and you're cooking with gas, and it's great. But how well are those projects sustained after the fact? When the university loses interest or an academic moves on, how do these projects live afterwards? And we realize that for a project to be a project, and this is what we teach in class, it's got a start date and an end date. We have to reach a point when we can pull out in these engagements. And how do we know we've reached that point? And it's questions like these that we've been grappling with in the engineering faculty, and realizing that the scientific method won't get you to the right answer, that we really have to go out, collaborate with the humanities and other faculties around us to see what we can do. For one, these projects does give us a better way of teaching. When we take the curriculum, our community engagement, and we plant it and embed it in our research, specifically multidisciplinary research, we find that something incredible happens. For one, the students participate more. They are more engaged, they do better, and they learn other skills beyond the science, and they still learn the science. But one thing that kept on coming back to us is that we need to develop sustainable solutions. And you'll see that nowhere in there we talk about technology. Technology is only the enabler for the sustainable solution, and we really need to find how are we going to apply this technology. And for us, it really came through this transdisciplinary, integrated approach to the research that we do, that a university really needs to be that embedded brain that's immersed in the city, in society, and that we open up these gates that the kids are banging at, and that we really get a return on the investment in these institutions. Universities are expensive, and if I do policy research and I do a questionnaire, and 5 years later we've influenced the policy, the person that I asked that question, that helped base the science on, probably isn't aware of the changes in his life and the efforts that has gone behind the scenes. We've realized that we cannot have our students leave universities thinking exactly the same way they did when they got here. You have to influence their mind. And the only way you can influence them in an ethical way is by giving them enough opportunities to engage with people that think different than themselves, and creating these kind of classrooms. And there's something really magical that happens when an engineering student and an arts student and a philosophy student and a student from humanities start solving the same problems. And that's what we try to do. Created environments where we still base it on the scientific method, but we talk about design science research, which is similar to the approach that you would use for developing apps, where you keep on testing small increments of the technology and the implementation of the project to see how it affects in reality, and you feed that back into the work that we do at university. We still write the papers about it. I'm going to skip through these fairly quickly, and hopefully you can see what we've done there. But all that we've done is we've changed the shift of the origin of the project. And really through our community engagement, which is often seen as a sort of a sideline activity of academics, we pulled that into the classroom. And we use that for benchmarking and for defining the project while still project managing the project to end, to see how we can get them completed. And we find ourselves in two spaces. We are either in our community engagement mode, where we are helping vulnerable communities, learning from that environment, and what we learn then translates into a commercial environment. And we've seen this more and more. Students are not just participating in academic exercises, they want to be CEOs of companies, they all have this entrepreneurial drive, and we started creating opportunities for that to happen. And it was because we went back to the drawing board. That was after about 3-hour session of students. We had some colleagues from Google help us, and we looked at what we were trying to achieve and what sort of trying to map the solution around youth in agriculture. Why do we see more youth in agriculture? And this has led us to sustainable socio-technical systems. So that's what we call the work that we're doing, and this is where we are sort of focusing. And I just want to give you an idea of some of the projects that's come out of it. And about 2 weeks ago at a meeting, somebody said, you've really disrupted the way that the system works. And I think that's the aspiration of anybody in science and technology, is to disrupt the system through technology. So that was really great. If I solve some, I'm sure you're all familiar with the Sustainable Development Goals that globally we're all trying to work at. If I look at problems from a technology perspective, I can solve some of those with technology. If I add economic development to that, it's not just the environment, but I'm looking at the GDP and how that will affect, I can solve more. But the first goals are around people and society and how we address those. So if I use the technology to address these problems, how can I change that? How can I affect some of that change, and how do I manage that change? The first thing we had to do is we had to learn from the other faculties. In the engineering curriculum, we teach design all the time. Although I can guarantee you that very few engineering graduates would have been exposed to the design thinking methods that we teach in industrial design in the Faculty of Art. And only through this collaboration do you see that migration of theories across the different disciplines. And basically what it comes down to is a human-centered design, where you put at the heart of the solution the community or the people that you're trying to support. So what came from that was the Youth Agri Initiative. It started as a pilot project in Ivory Park. Luckily, there were quite a few initiatives in the university that we could rely on. There's a Izindaba Zakudla project in humanities, where we have about 200 farmers coming to the university every 2 weeks to talk about the problems and the things that they are dealing with. And basically the question that we asked was, can I bring in smart technology in an environment where we know the profile of Refill, where there is how they usually look. It's older women, not supported by the rest of the community, not valuing the efforts of their labor, and definitely not considering a commercialization or selling of their product. So how do we address that? And we sort of see unemployed youth as part of the solution and part of the energy that we have to be our agents and to take this thinking into the environment. So basically what we did is we went to look for gardens in Ivory Park. When we started, we had records from 2013 and 2014, and most of the people have either moved or moved on. And it was really difficult to find these gardens until we brought in the local young people from that community to support us. Basically, the program involves training them on how to identify opportunities. We taught them about organic farming, and we gave them a smartphone that they worked back by submitting survey data for us. And we found close to about 700 gardens, beautiful gardens that were growing food, most of them growing organic food because that's the only solution that you have, but not really looking at selling. The reason why we did this research was to go and identify that value chain. If I was bringing in an engineering solution, as was originally the plan, we would be designing off-grid cold storage and dumping down the infrastructure somewhere in the community, sort of show people how to switch it on and how to solve things. But when we got there, there was already infrastructure planted by the city of Joburg. Every region in Joburg has an agri-hub. And some of them are shining examples of where it's working, and some of them are just not working. The agri-hub in Ivy Park was handing out dried food samples from the UN. And that's not the way that we want to see this infrastructure being used. We still get to develop some technology, but the key focus is that we look for the role that unemployed youth can play in this research. So first of all, they become our data collectors. They help us collect information where everything else we know is based on 2011 census data. And then we start looking for the missing link. And more often than not, we find that it is technology being connected to the internet. This program we ran last year in October, and it really coincided with the city switching on free Wi-Fi, that the solutions that we wanted to implement became a possibility. And basically what we're doing now is we're crowdsourcing food from locally grown organic farms using unemployed youth to participate in the program as organic certification officers. We train them up on how to do these things. And we are now supplying, and actually supplied to, we had an event at Monte Cassino, and we were supplying food to Monte Cassino from these farms. So I can get food from a local farm in a restaurant in about under 8 hours if I have that supply chain mapped. So the engineering problem is, it's actually just a logistics problem that we've solved. And this had a lovely spin-off, that we developed this amazing platform that we can use. And where we are now, that's going to be one of the farms with the most beautiful view of the city. We've got 65 rooftops that we are turning into Rooftop Gardens. We have developed a platform called Research Go. It's basically the Pokemon Go for researchers, because you have to go and find your geolocated data. We can deploy and send people around. But it was because we took the research out of the lab, out of the university, that we actually got to do these things. And I actually noticed one of my colleagues sitting here, so good to see that we're getting some publicity on these projects. But we're not just falling in and building infrastructure. While engineering will be developing greenhouses with off-grid solution plugged in so we can reduce the water and energy consumption of these rooftop gardens, we will be piloting and testing one at a time so that we learn how the business model works, how do we incubate the people that need to run these businesses for us. And farming is not a tech incubator, it works a little differently. And because we have so little experience in farming as engineers, we are pushed into other environments to collaborate and to sort of pull on those resources outside of the engineering faculty. The last project that I want to sort of just give you some insights in what we've done. So based on the Research Go platform we built for the agriculture project, we realized that we've actually developed something quite interesting. The research that I based our work on was done over about 5 years, where they surveyed 9 different townships across South Africa, and they had to fill in quite a lot of information using census data. And I had the same problem, that I couldn't find the places that we needed to go. The geolocation wasn't done, and usually there was quite a bit of a mess in the work that we've done. And on the 23rd of December, and I like starting the story there, that on the 23rd of December we got a call asking if we could do any Christmas miracles over the holiday time. That we needed to have unemployed youth on the ground doing some incredible work for us before the year end. And because we've already had the experience and we had the tools, we were quite confident that we could do it. Needless to say, we had a very short Christmas, and after that, basically on the 2nd of January, we started kicking off. We trained 850 unemployed youth through the same methodology to be our data collectors, to understand what is happening in the township economy. We identified 9 township areas, and we actually managed in about 10 weeks' time, they worked for 6 weeks in each of their local communities, we managed to identify 80,000 township enterprises and do an economic survey or enterprise profile survey, and also a resilience survey. We looked at the resilience and the trust relationships, whether or not our community is worried about going to bed hungry, do they have access to food and power, the type of dwellings that they're living in. And we managed to do that by being very unaware of what the industry standard is and how these projects usually run. And if you're in the market research sort of space, you know that to get 1,000 respondents on one theme is quite difficult. But by partnering with the community, by making them part of our solution, we not only get this data, but we have now networked and connected 800 kids in an environment where we can now start asking questions about small-scale manufacturing, entrepreneurship opportunities, lots of issues around logistics that we can solve. And it's basically just an online platform that was developed through collaboration from students and some of our industry partners. Some of the kids from the Solar Challenge and the Solar Car is actually part of the startups that's been supporting the work that we do. But if you can see on the photo at the bottom there, you have a pin so you know where the survey was taken. They submit photos, and we've got quite a few checks and balances to make sure that the data that we've collected is accurate. They cannot submit a survey if it wasn't completed in the way that we wanted to do, and they get paid per survey. Based on this study, we're now optimizing the tools so we can do the next one. Every program that we run, every project that we do, we've got another cohort of digitally enabled young people finding opportunities, connecting to the environment, and finding ways to solve problems for themselves. These kids are well disciplined, they're really dedicated. We had very low dropout rates, and the ones that had to leave the program actually brought their phones back to the university from Katlehong and Shoshanguva to return those phones. So for the students, we use students in the program. For the students participating in this program, I think it really shifted their sense of what's happening in the world out there and the role that they can play as engineers. But for the community, it was also great for us to sort of participate in that. Basically what we're busy doing with now, mapping the data, figuring out how do we represent this data in a way that it makes sense, that we have open access to the information. I know that many of the communities where we went to, surveys has already been done, but that information is sitting somewhere locked up, unavailable, and we need to have more open, shared resources in this regard. I just want to give you like a snapshot of the things that we did. This was sort of some of the data as we go through it, but we looked at the demographics, the financial, all the financial stuff about the community, their resilience, the enterprise itself, and then we would identify top industries, have an idea of how formalized these industries are, and we're using this information to develop those same value chains as we did, for the agriculture project. And from there, the engineering and the technology and the science and the humanities and the multi-stakeholder engagement, all of that comes together, that we can truly have engaged, responsible research, that we know that we are driving social innovation, and we are creating opportunities for our students to be exposed to things like entrepreneurship and the soft skills that we often don't teach in class, that we give them those opportunities, but that we know that we have to do that by driving socio-technical systems and building these socio-technical systems for us to participate in. And you don't do that alone. You don't do that as an engineer in an environment where you are only talking to other engineers. We have to create collaborative spaces. We need to move across these silos and find, luckily, I've been very lucky, so I'm representing quite a few people in the university when I stand here. But in every faculty that I go, we find these projects, we find these collaborations, and it's about how we talk about them, how we put them out there, and what we do with the information that we have. How do we share and make sure that other people have access to this information, keeping the Copy Act and all the other things in mind. And that will be it, sir.